Welcome back to another episode of Let's Try to Help This World as Best as We Can. We had such an amazing feedback after the Purim event that the three of us did that we were asked to do it again. So I would like to introduce Rabbi Yakov Horowitz, Rabbi Avi Landa, for once again joining and doing what we can to help make sure that we can keep our communities as safe as possible. It's really important that we all understand that Pesach is the most beautiful time of year. But statistically, it can also be a very dangerous time for children. Large gatherings, unfamiliar spaces, disrupted routines, and distracted parents can create a perfect condition for abuse to occur and go unnoticed. Awareness isn't being paranoid, it's protection. And hopefully we're going to do our part today to provide you with some ideas as well as some other thoughts on these topics. Rabbi Horowitz, can you
Yes, sure.
begin?
With pleasure. Thank you, Reb Zvi and Reb Avi. It's a pleasure to be on with you guys again. And I want to thank Amudim for all your amazing, amazing work with individuals and for the community. I think it's really important that we have an honest look at this, and sometimes when we get in a situation where there's a holy event, Yom Tov, a holiday, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, other things like that, we tend to feel like protected. The holiday is going to protect us, or nothing bad can happen. But if you look at it differently, if you take out the religious component and you say, well, let's say someone's attending a hotel program, or they're going to their grandparents where there are 4 families there, and they invited some guests. So if you just think I'm going to be our children are going to be at a place where there's lots of new people, very unstructured time, and the assumption is that during a 3, 4, 5 hour Pesach Seder, the kids are going to run around and play with whom we don't know. If you don't think about it this way, of course it's going to be an event that is unfortunately ripe for something terrible to happen. So we shouldn't be obsessed by this, but it's something that we definitely need to think about. And like everything else, preparing about it by us talking about it, and by you doing, each of you who are listening to this, think about what you can do to see to it that there is supervision. One other way to think about it is you have a 7-year-old child that goes to school, throughout the school year. How many people is that child exposed to besides for their peers or their class? A handful of adults and kids in the other school. It's much more supervised than our Pesach Seder is. And there isn't that much unstructured time. So just think about it realistically so that we can plan, so that it can only be a happy, beautiful event.
Thank you so much, Zvi. Thank you, Rabbi Yaakov. It's a pleasure again to be here together with both of you. Just to echo some of what Rabbi Horowitz was saying, I think there's never a wrong time to have what we like to call a healthy boundaries conversation with our children. Those can be obviously different at different ages, always age appropriate. Even a 5 or 7-year-old can be spoken to about healthy boundaries, as well as a 13 and 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. These are things that we need to be talking to our children about every so often. The common times that people perk up and think about this is when their children are going to be away from home for extended periods of time, like before they go off to a yeshiva, to a masifta, to a school, or before they go to sleepaway camp. But really before Yom Tov, it's a great time as well. It doesn't need to be a long conversation. It can be a short conversation one-on-one with each child, I would recommend, because each child's at a different stage and age, where you just speak about, at an age-appropriate way, the idea that it's never okay for somebody else to be trying to look, show, or touch at different private parts of the body, parts that are normally covered by bathing suits, acting in certain ways that make you feel weird or just feels off. Anything that has that kind of feeling to it, you need to come and you need to get out of there and tell us right away, tell the parents right away. And it's important to just put out there, like, it's never lashon hara, it's never snitching. I like to always just say the phrase, it's not snitching, it's saving. That means, snitching is the Rebbe told the class, don't eat any snacks now. And some kid is sneaking a little snack in the back of the class, and you raise your hand and say, oh, Rebbe, he's eating in class. We could call that snitching. But anytime it's something dangerous or unhealthy, it's not snitching, it's saving. It's not lashon hara, it's litoelis. It has in terms of the danger and the healthiness and the making sure that to stop anything that's unhealthy. And so once we understand those 2 points, you always, even if you just have a doubt, maybe this was a little weird, you come and talk to us about it. Worst case scenario, we have a nice conversation and it's okay and we move forward. But it's really important to always tell us about anything that's going on. That's the first idea that I think I would just put out there in terms of making sure our children are prepared in and of themselves, regardless of what we can do proactively, but preventatively, what we can do to help our children be careful as we go into the wonderful Yom Tovim coming up.
Can I also, Rabbi Avi, what you said was spot on, every single point. I would just add one thing that we should tell our children, no matter who it is. No matter who it is. Because the instinct is to shut it down when we're with family.
What's that line? You never have to hug anybody, even
right,
Bubby
exactly,
or Zadie, if you're not comfortable.
And by the way, any grandparents who are watching this, community members, grandparents, I tell, when I horseplay with our grandkids or I do stuff with them, I always say something like, if let's say, for example, I have things like play gorilla with the kids, walk around like a gorilla and they run away. It's a whole big thing. I tell the kids, if you're not comfortable, if you get scared, if you're frightened by this, or if you don't, just say stop and I'll stop that second. And they actually, the last couple of years, the kids started, it really became funny. I do it. The kids say, stop, start. And I think it's great because it's giving them agency. It's part of the whole gorilla shtick. But what it's telling the children is that even I know you love me and I get all that, but if you don't like it, just say stop and I'll stop right away.
I like to always say, whether it's a friend, a relative, or someone you respect. Those are the three ways that I say it. And I'll just add in, specifically tickling is something which can be innocent, but I've found too many times is a Pesach for things that become not innocent. So probably should be avoided in general, but especially the children need to know they can say, no, I don't like you tickling me, no matter, even if they're very young.
Right, and thank you for bringing that up. It's extremely important. And, speaking of grandparents, when I do talks, and people say, what's with this? Now I need permission to kiss my grandchildren. And families have different norms for that. But when grandparents call me very offended, could you imagine? My daughter-in-law told me that I can't kiss the grandkids without permission. So, or they say about tickling or anything else, I tell them this is a great opportunity to support what the children are learning. The reason the child safety education is effective because they're told that they have agency and they can speak up. And if you give them a slobbery kiss and they don't like it and they come to their mother and their mother can't get you to stop, you're training, you're undoing all the critical child safety information that the children need. This is what they're told currently. They weren't told that. We weren't told this when we were kids. And, look what happened to so many people.
So let me add to that before I reshift into the focus. But I've said this many, many times. Part of me is very upset about something on a personal note that bothers me, but it's the reality of the world we live in. I could never forget the time when I was, let's say, in 4th or 5th grade, and I was having a bad day, and I had an amazing Rebbe who put his arm on my shoulder, and we took a walk, up and down the hallway, maybe even around the block, and he gave me the few minutes I needed. And you know what? That might have been great. But in today's day and age, we're living in different times. We're teaching our kids different messages, and it's important that people understand it. We're not doing it in a way to say that everybody's an abuser, but if we teach our children that they have the right to decide for their own body or their own feelings. The book we spoke about, Rabbi Horowitz, many, many years ago, Uncle Willie Tickles, right? That was one of the first books that was ever, put out on this. That I remember that my mother read that to me, many, many years ago. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. I'm going to frame this, and I think I want to go in three different directions. One is I want to talk about family gatherings, because as we know, it's really common that most child sexual abuse is perpetrated by somebody the child knows, often a family member, a close family friend. I want to also highlight hotels, and I also want to spend a few minutes talking about the importance of understanding survivors' position when they are either at a Seder or with us for Yom Tif, certain things that can be triggering, and things that we should tell people to keep in mind. It's just some important points. I'm going to start off with some of the pointers that I put together on large family gatherings, risks, and tips. So it's very important that children, especially in our community, we have this, I don't even know the right way to describe this word, but basically there's this bubble, the frum bubble. Everybody looks the same. Everybody acts the same. We're all there. We're all here together. Everybody knows each other. And by definition, we let our guard down. That's just a reality. We do it as adults also, right? When we're in a familiar place, then at the end of the day, that's something that happens. So if we do that as adults, we can only imagine, what children do. Now, also, we have to remember that these are atmospheres of fun, celebration, enjoyment, a lot of hugging, a lot of people not seeing each other for a while. Unfortunately, a lot of adults drinking more so than, just the arbacosos. There's a lot of rooms in people's houses, bedrooms, basements, attics, things of that nature. These are all things, during the Seder, people, are having these long sedarim where they think it's important, and for some people it is, for some people ADHD will kill them, but either which way, for children, it could be very detrimental when you're going hours and hours long of no supervision. So I'd like to maybe give the floor to, let's discuss those for a few moments.
Yeah, I think definitely we have to recognize that when we're all together in a house, it sometimes can be a couple of houses in the neighborhood, which means you can have some children, then the Seder is going really late, and you can have some children a few doors down in a totally separate house without any supervision, really. It could be just a couple of young teenagers or preteens, something that we normally would not allow, just like during the year in terms of a sleepover with zero adult supervision. And all of a sudden, the Pesach Seder night is just automatically kind of makes it a time for that. And we have to be thinking to ourselves, is that really something that we are okay with when we're preparing and planning? Once again, the preparation is so crucial, because in the moment, when you lost the matzahs and you're trying to find it, and you just remembered that you forgot to grind up the charoses, and again, we're holding before the hotel now, although these things happen at the hotel too, trust me. But you're trying to quickly try to get everything together. That's not going to be the time to think about these preventative and healthy decision making conversations and structures. But beforehand, now in these next couple of weeks are the times to have these conversations and to think, okay, where are the kids going to be if it's 1 a.m. and we still have an hour to go and they're tired and they want to go back? Where are they going back to? Are they going to a bedroom down the hall from the dining room? Are they going to a place that's far away, that's down the block? So thinking about these things and making preparations and arrangements, thinking about the fact that even in the same house, there's no reason that kids, maybe there's a bunch of cousins sleeping together, there's no reason doors need to be all the way closed, certainly not locked. In general, those are good tips for when kids are coming together, family is coming together, kids are sleeping, multiple kids in the same room. And one thing that I would just end my piece for now on, it's more of a global idea that applies in general to everything, and it certainly applies to these safety habits as well. mothers and fathers, but I've seen it more with mothers, but I'll say it to both, of course, should trust their intuition, their gut instincts. Sometimes I've just heard too many stories and been involved in too many cases where a mother or a father just has this feeling like something just doesn't feel right. And maybe it's like, wait, we're about to do the next part of the Haggadah, Eliyahu's here, he'll wait. Eliyahu will wait for you to just go spot check your children in the bedroom because you have a feeling of it, just something doesn't feel right. Listen to those feelings. Again, not to be obsessive, but every once in a while, it could be as much as, every 20, 30 minutes. You're just doing a little check-in here and there to see how everyone's doing. It's just a smart habit to be in, especially when we have younger children who are gathered together with different children of different age groups, potentially all sharing similar rooms, and to be thinking and discussing and preparing for that.
I'm going to just add one thing before I go to Rabbi Horowitz, which is you mentioned something very important. We keep talking about abuse, but let's also remember that very often there's experimentation. It could even be the same age. So that's a very important thing as well that, very often we overlook, where it might not even be coming from a quote unquote bad place. But again, these are environments that things like this can happen.
Well, thank you so much for pointing that out, because I was taking it for granted that, it's not all the same category. It's a great point. And so many of the cases start with kids experimenting with each other. I appreciate that.
And we could give it's not a bad practice for parents to have like a code word, which means I'm feeling uncomfortable. To tell your children that if you use this word, if you use this, whatever word you make up,
can you give us an example
that's
of one
a
of those?
sign that I'm not feeling safe right now. And
banana split.
No, you could say exactly. Ice cream. No, say something. Use a word that means that
Right.
I'm just not feeling uncomfortable because there's people around. And the person that's been bothering them or getting in their space might be sitting at the table. And I'm saying, you playtime. Make a word that the children should know, that if they tell you that, you'll automatically step in and take them aside, because they might not be that expressive. Or if you tell them, if you pull my sleeve like this, if you come over, I'm sitting at the table, you can just pull my sleeve, and that'll mean that you really want my attention and you're not feeling comfortable.
And you don't turn around and go, get away from me, I'm in the middle of saying something.
Doing? Right. So
you should know, my father's Alzheimer's did this with us when we were younger, because he worked in Albany during the week. And there were times my mother wasn't driving, and there were times that, that my father needed someone to pick me up. And we had code words that when a person said, your father sent me, this is the code word. And that was something we had from way back then. So a couple of, let's just do some of the pointers, just putting it together, which is, so obviously it was mentioned earlier, giving the child autonomy over their own body. Now, as we unfortunately see with the current events, with all these things going on in the world, if we teach this to children, it will also help them when they become adults. So we have to look at a full picture. So again, nobody, even Bubby or Zaidi or grandma or grandpa or uncle, Yankel, it doesn't matter. I think it's very important that, we have policies and we announce it. Open door policy. We don't allow the door to the bedrooms to be closed fully. However it's structured, unless it's the times, whatever you figure out, but announce these policies. That means there is no adult who's ever allowed to be in a room with a child with a door closed. Period. End of story. The same thing that we talk about in yeshivas, right? People say to me all the time, oh, it's not fair. They're painting a bad rap on the Rebbeim. I said, no. You're making a mistake. If the Rebbe's not in a room closed with the student, then the Rebbe's protecting himself. Look at it from all sides. So there is no exception. I was just showing her something. I wanted to play a game. No, there is no such thing. Another thing I think is identifying unsupervised spaces and eliminate them. The hiding space under your staircase, that, whatever it is. And then we have the stuff that we talk about always, look out. Again, I always say signs and symptoms are a scary thing because they're not always there. But we can do the best we can. So look out if there's any adult who's gravitating towards the children or singling out any one child. And again, it wouldn't be an Amudim discussion if we don't remind parents, when you drink, your inhibitions are down. And it is much harder to properly parent, especially in environments, which this will apply both to hotels and to family gatherings, if you are inebriated and you cannot be there. So let's keep in mind that alcohol, marijuana, edibles, all these things certainly will have an impact. And it's extremely important to have constant discussions with the kids throughout. In other words, just gentle conversations, talk about them. I don't like to say, ask your kid point blank, did somebody touch you in a place inappropriate? Because that usually is, opening it up for, but, are you comfortable? Are you okay? Is there anyone here that you wish wouldn't be here? Everybody knows their kids of which way to have those discussions. I think it's really important, and this is something we speak about always.
I think
communicate,
if we can
communicate,
extend
communicate.
it, I was just talking to, our daughter Sarah, our youngest, when she was in high school, I used to go out to Starbucks with her once a week. I shut off our phones, and we just had great quality time. But that we really, were bonding together. And she went up to get something, and a woman, an Orthodox Jewish woman, went over to her and said, "Are you feeling safe?" She didn't know that I was her father. She just said, she just sees this guy, and thank God, with all our kids, when I would talk, I would totally be locked in. I didn't, my phone was off, I was just talking to her. So someone thought it might be creepy. So our daughter, Sarah, got really offended. "Oh, that was disgusting." She said, "That's my father." And I told her, "Please, darling, go back and thank her, because she didn't say your father's doing something. This person is a creep." She did it I thought it was very thoughtful. It was really, I was very impressed.
I'm actually impressed by that. I mean, because how many times do we,
the halo effect.
Do we have, what's
The
that
halo
effect called again that they had with the woman in
right? And I actually got up, went over
concept.
after Sarah thanked her. I went over to the woman and thanked her. I said, "Thank you very much, because if my daughter was with someone and wasn't feeling safe, I'd be very happy that I'm sure you had no reason to do this." So maybe we can extend that if we see people in our family, or generally speaking, that some boundaries might be getting eroded. It's okay for us to ask the kids, "Are you feeling safe? Are you feeling comfortable?" It's just another layer of protection.
One example that I've heard that I really like is the kid says to the parent, "I'm having one of those stomach aches." So, it's kind of a normal thing to say, but it's a unique
it's great,
one of
Rabbi, because
those.
it also
And
allows the
set up
parent to go
beforehand.
off for some private time with the kid.
That's
That makes perfect sense. Brilliant. I'm glad I thought of it.
Right.
Exactly, because it's like, now
Thanks,
I need
Avi.
to
That
take
was
care
really
of you.
good.
So that's one example. I got it from actually one of the Safety Kid programs. And another idea I just want to say, just in terms of like overall perspective, especially for the Seder night, is you see that Chazal have so much focus throughout the entire Seder on keeping the kids involved, keeping the kids asking questions, feeling good, wanting to be a part of it. It's not a night that is designed for the adults to have fun, to darshan all the Sisrei Torah, the secrets of the Torah. It's that you could save that for the next morning when you wake up for Nates, because you're into Kabbalistic things. And even though you stayed up all night, you also stayed up for Tikkun Chatzos. But for the Seder night, we're there for the children. We're there to keep them involved and keep them engaged. And we can say, Kal v'chomer ben beno shel kal v'chomer. We could say, certainly it makes sense that Chazal would want us to keep our children safe. and healthy throughout the Seder night. If that means making a little bit of a faster Seder, which maybe there's even some halachic foundation for in terms of when you're eating the afikomen, and there's no reason to keep everyone starving until really late at night because you're darshaning every single line of Magid. You can save all those divrei Torah for the mealtime and for afterwards. But again, the point is that the whole Seder should be something that the kids should be involved in. Why should the little kids miss out on Chad Gadya, which is a pretty cool part of the Seder, even though it's all the way at the end, because it needs to be at 3 a.m. Okay, some kids, even if it's at 1 a.m. or 1:30, it's going to be too late for them. But we should try to move things along and keep our eye on the safety of the children. I actually think it's very in line with what Chazal's ratzon and vision is for the Seder L'Chatchila.
I hear that. So I actually grew up, it's funny, we had a pivoting time in my house in the earlier years. Everything was at home. There was no concept of hotel, mishing, the whole 9 yards, which, by the way, just off topic. And if you want to cut this out, that's fine. But I don't know. I think we need to figure out a way to change the way minhagim are addressed when it comes to Yamim Tovim. How many families get ripped apart because the son-in-law doesn't do this and the daughter-in-law doesn't do that, and now you can only go to one? I promise you, Chazal did not want that we should use minhagim and gebroks and not gebroks and this and that as ways to create machlokes and strife amongst family members. That's just my own pet peeve. Again, that's my own thing. Another thing, people can complain and say Zvi Gluck thinks she's going to change things. It doesn't matter. I just find it to be really troubling. Like, it's just, there's so many fights over it. And then it's like, but when they're dating, of course, it's like, no, we love her, she's great. And all of a sudden, resenting. And that resentment carries on. And then it goes to the grandkids. Why couldn't we go to Bubby and Zadie? Because they do eat gebroks, they don't. I just think it's one of those things that, I mean, again, not for this topic, but I just felt the need to get it off my chest.
I just want to add one thing to what you just said. It's very easy for us to think about how we need to be the adults in the room when we are the 35-year-old parent and our children are 8, 9, 12, young children. And we're like, okay, the child wants this or wants that, and we don't want to make them upset. We want to be flexible for them. It's much more difficult when we're the adult and we have son-in-laws or daughter-in-laws who have their feelings and we see them as adults already. But the truth is that they're really still children. They're still young. We can think back to when we were in our young 20s. They don't have the maturity level and the life experience and the recognition, like Zvi is saying, for the importance of shalom, especially at the Seder. We need to look at these young, newlywed, first couple years married adults as young adults, as the children compared to perhaps the parents and grandparents who are hosting the Seder, or the ones that are hosting the table at the hotel that we'll jump into in the private Seder room. We need to recognize that we're the adults in the room and we can be mavater. And actually, that's the greatest lesson we can give to our children.
We
the ability to be mavater and to maintain
5
that
children
shalom.
to the chuppah. And my mechatanim, the parents of the chassan ukala on the other side, would ask me, or we would discuss how the wedding's going to run, or the chuppah and this. And they say, do you have any minhagim, you have customs that you put? So I said, my most important custom to me, my biggest minig, is that I want my mechatanim to be happy. That's what I used to tell them. I said, that's what I said. My minig is that I want the mechatana to be happy. I said, Udi and I are walking the kids down. That's not negotiable. In terms of father, I said, that's the way it is. Other than that, whatever you'd like, whatever you want. And something, it's hard for us to imagine as our kids get older that we're really setting a culture for our family, that they look to us when there are things like this. And when we're compassionate and flexible, and we send a message that family counts, and that we close an eye, even if things aren't exactly the way we want them to be, I think it's a great lesson to the kids.
Right. Yep, absolutely. So jumping right into the hotel specific. So as I was saying, when we were younger, we were home, and Pesach was interesting. And then one year, my father was saying, "Is it stark ad mei of the esrim," or as he says,
I
"Mei of
could
the
see him
shishim"?
saying
Why are
that.
we cutting it down? You know, he got injured a few weeks before Pesach, and we ended up going to a hotel. And again, I can say this: we had the most amazing time in hotels. We really did. But a lot of what I'm going to say now are things that I could say firsthand need to be addressed in many, many ways. So a couple of things that just to frame it. First of all, there's hundreds of people, adults, kids, like we said earlier, the frum bubble effect, right? Everybody looks like us. The parents are here. We're all in the same thing. We let our guard down completely. Very often kids are playing unsupervised, running in the hallways, in the game rooms, going to the pool, riding elevators, which, by the way, is a totally separate story. I could tell you, I myself have walked into elevators when in a hotel. This wasn't even a Pesach, but this was a weekend retreat, and it was a Thursday night or Friday. It was Thursday night, and there was an adult holding his phone, showing it to a kid in the elevator with pornography on it. It was like this adult had 30 seconds to, I guess, plant his move on this kid between the floors and jumped at that opportunity. So elevators, again, keep it in mind. It's funny. There was always the famous question, is elevators, yes, yichud, no yichud. And you heard me say last time, I hold yichud as between men and men, men and women, women and women. Just be safe, you don't have to put yourself in a situation. But elevators itself happens to be something that I remember literally walking in on that situation and having to address it. And then there's also the staff, at the end of the day, again, I'm sure that every staff member is vetted amazingly well, the babysitting staff, the entertainment staff. But let's be honest, these are kids watching kids. So these are situations that, again, we're not telling people don't go to hotels. We're not trying to create that fear factor, but understand that lots of people, lots of strangers, they all look alike. We like to believe we're part of the same community, and many of them were hired to be entrusted with our children's safety. So these things together are a recipe that we need to be extra careful
I think
about.
the overriding
we'll start with Rabbi Horowitz this time.
Message would be that kids tend to be at a much higher risk when we make assumptions. Like we see an 18-year-old grandchild of ours walking out with a couple of kids, and we assume that they're staying with them the whole time. So the people at the table think that kid's watching. That kid says, "Go back to your family." So that's where sometimes things fall between the cracks when there isn't a clear handoff of who's watching the children at any given time. And by the way, that goes for walking back and forth to shul. I've been encouraging rabbis and community leaders of shuls, of synagogues, to see that the children walk in groups. And they shouldn't go into, a lot, especially like in Rockland County and Muncie where we live, everybody's cutting through the backyards because the streets aren't in a clear grid and people take shortcuts. So to try to see that there's either an adult or kids going together. So when your children are telling you that, we want to go to the tea room, we want to go whatever, tell them that we'd like you be back at a certain time, or have somebody be in charge of making sure that the kids are going, if they're going to their room, for example, or anything like that. See to it that you have something in place. So one of the hotels we went at, it was very spread out. It was out west. It was a gorgeous place, but there was so many different rooms, and we actually made up among ourselves. We had like 7, 8 people that just, took 10 minutes just to walk around. For guys with our personality package, Zvi, you and I, it would be great to be able to get up and walk around for 10 minutes. So I took a turn. So it's helpful to have some sort of idea of how that supervision is going to work.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'll just add briefly, I'll just preface this idea with this story. I was once years ago, we used to go to a Pesach hotel that really prided itself on the very high level of kashrus that it kept in the kitchen and with all the food.
You never
And
went into the kitchen, though, right?
no,
That's a separate, not for today. You know the joke they say. I have to say this. I'm sorry, but when they talk about avachad kosher v'sameach, right? So you know the famous story. If you're going to your in-laws, have a chag kosher. If you're going to a hotel, have a chag sameach. And if you're staying home, have a chag kosher v'sameach.
oh, very nice.
Sorry, I needed to.
No, so this is a story that goes along those lines. So anyway, one of the members on our group wanted ketchup very badly. And it seems that the waiter, who was not a Jewish waiter, he obviously wanted to impress and get his tip. And he wasn't able to find the Pesach ketchup. Either they ran out or whatever the issue was. And he came back 20 minutes later with a regular bottle of Heinz ketchup. And they started using, wow, what a waiter. And then someone's like, wait, is this Pesach? Now, again, it's only kitnius. It's not a major issue, but still it speaks to crossing those boundaries that the hashgacha set up. And they found out that, well, the waiter wanted to make them happy, so he found the person who had the key to the locked chametz kitchen, went in, got a bottle of Heinz ketchup, and brought it to the table to make them happy, right? So the point is, when we look at a hotel, we think to ourselves, the opposite of when we're kind of in a neighborhood and the kids are sleeping a few houses down. It's, we have to be careful. We have to check in on them. But in a hotel, we're all in one building or one campus. It feels much more safe, much more familiar, like we're saying. But the truth is, like everyone, like Rabbi Yakov was saying, like Zvi was saying, it's so spread out. There are so many opportunities for problematic places that we're unfamiliar with, that we're not even aware of, potentially. Locked up places that were left open and kids could... Again, we just want to be keeping an eye on recognizing where they are, where they could be, spot checking, following our intuition. Perhaps we should say, especially in a hotel setting that's not as familiar to us, and where, like Rabbi Yaakov said very well, where our feelings and our assumptions can be dulled because it feels like one big place.
Right, so some of the tips, thank you so much. Some of the things just to try to bridge it back together, which I'm just going to put some of these from what you guys said, is obviously children should never be going alone. So maybe like a buddy system, but we know who the buddy is. Having established check-in times, you can go there, but you need to meet us at this and this time, at this and this place. Rabbi Horowitz, you said something that I'm very impressed with. Walking the space. Yeah, it's great for ADHD, but it's also great to know spots. I mean, the hotel that we went to, I could tell you every spot, good, bad, and ugly. Okay, I knew that place cold. Safe adults by name. If you have a problem and we're not around and you see so-and-so, specific, pointers. We also have to remember safety of health and safety, right? Swimming pools, pool safety. We have to remember that very often at these places, they either have lifeguards. Lately, I've noticed a lot of hotels, they stopped having lifeguards. They just have at your own risk because they can't get sued if they have no lifeguard. I mean, these are some of the things that we've started seeing. So, and also very important, know the ratio of the children's programming. If they say there's a day camp and it's a 13-year-old for 27 6-year-olds, that might not be the, the safest type of environment. So again, I think these are things that a lot of it is hotel specific, but really it's what we like to say common sense is not so common, but it's common sense of like, sometimes what you think is so open and so simple is really where the problem is. Like, yeah, so Yankee's going in to lay down for an hour because he's tired. And okay, but we have a rule. The door can't be closed. You can't, like, these are things that we sometimes take for granted. So I think especially in times of Yom Tif, in times of, any joyous occasion, weddings, bar mitzvahs, weekend bar mitzvahs, Shabbat Sheva, Brachas Afar, all these things, whether it's at home, whether it's in a hotel, these all open up for opportunities. But there's also the flip side, which is the opportunity for us to continue that communication with our children. It's an opportunity for us to speak to them beforehand. It's an opportunity for us to remind their children that their body belongs to them. Remind them there's a difference between a secret and a surprise, right? I remember the first time I heard that. There's no secrets, there are surprises. You gotta understand this. At the end of the day, these are opportunities that can open up the dialogue and open the conversation. And we shouldn't miss on these opportunities, especially when we have a reason for it. So it can be helpful, and it can also be there for helping them much longer term, not just for the specific Yom Tif or event. I wanted to now shift gears to the overstimulation of Pesach. Noise, crowds, late nights. A lot of times, a lot of people that we're dealing with were abused during times of Yom Tovim. We see this from clients of ours, especially when it was family members, uncles, cousins, siblings, grandparents. I just had a conversation with a mother recently, and my heart is still aching. I don't even know the right response, where the mother reached out about how to address the fact that the father, meaning the grandfather, was doing something where they were hosting the entire family. Her child was abused, and the abuser was an uncle. They never told the grandparents about the abuse. Half the family doesn't believe it. And the mother's like, listen, I'm very supportive of my daughter, but enough is enough. I want to go to my parents for the 70th anniversary or 50th anniversary, whatever it was. And blaming their child for the fact that well, why can't, I said, you're not going for any reason other than to show your child support. I've been supporting her for years. She's not getting over it. These are situations that come up a lot, and especially on Yom Tovim. And nobody wants to hear this, oh, you're going to have a miserable Yom Tov because you shouldn't be with your in-laws, grandparents, cousins, uncles, things of that nature. But let's remember, those are the times that things might have happened, and we have to be extra sensitive about that. There's nothing wrong with telling our children, and this, by the way, applies to everything, not just survivors, but anybody, giving them an exit. If you're feeling tough, if something's, stressful, use that code word, right? I love that idea. Use the code word, right? Your stomach ache, that again, The other thing that I think I want to really try to discuss for a few minutes is the concept of making sure that survivors are not forced into anything. That guilt of the whole family's together, you must do this, you must participate. Years and years of therapy can be undone by one situation that can just completely flare up. So I would like to, we'll start with Rabbi Avi Landa this time. Let me get some thoughts. Let's hear some thoughts on these topics.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I mean, there are all sorts of, Pesach, Yom Tov in general is a break from routine. It's a different schedule. Let's not just talk about the Seder night, but let's talk about the going to shul, and it can be a new community for certain people that they're staying by and that they're a guest by. And then there's the Chol HaMoed, and there's certain types of trips that the family might want to take. I think we absolutely need to be sensitive and have discussions. Again, preparation's the key. Having a discussion on Chol HaMoed morning when some people davened late and now it's already noon, and if we don't leave now, we're not going to end up doing anything, and now everyone's pressured to just do whatever everyone else says we should do. So therefore, we're going to go to the shooting range. And that's what we decided, but we forgot or didn't think of ahead of time, and everyone was just pressured that maybe there's somebody where the shooting range would be triggering, pun intended, for them. Many other types of activities that for whatever reason might be something that's uncomfortable. If we think beforehand, it will save us a lot of agmas nefesh anyway. It's not very popular to think, what are we going to do each day of Chol HaMoed on Rosh Chodesh Nisan? But it's not a bad idea to think about that, as opposed to thinking about it Matzeh, the first days, and then going into each day of Chol HaMoed. And when we think about that, it gives opportunity for somebody to place a private call to say, I know you mentioned on this day you might be doing this. I'm not so sure I'm so comfortable with that. It's something that I'm not really so comfortable with. Maybe I'll lechatchila, I'll set up something that I'm going to do differently for that day. Or maybe there's another idea that we could do that's similar, that I am okay with. And we respect everyone else's wishes. So I really think preparation is the key in this area.
No,
And
I
I'd
think
love to hear what Rabbi
what you
Yaakov
said
would have
about planning is
to add to this as well.
is probably the most important thing. Is just thinking about what you want to do. Are all kids going to be comfortable doing what you want to do? You know, children have anxieties about. I'm not necessarily only related to child safety, but just being into the kids. And that if a number of, I just took, we down here in Florida, some of our grandkids came, and I took them. You know, they went like water skiing on a board, but whatever. It was a lot of fun. I checked with each child individually if they wanted to go, and gave them an out and told them that if you don't want to go, I'll find something else to do. You know, because sometimes the kids, depending on their risk tolerance, will love it, and some just aren't comfortable saying it. Then they get out on the water, and they have a total meltdown. So, like, to give kids real agency to say that some things they're just not comfortable doing, and that's okay, and we'll offer them, you know, an alternative. So that has also to do, if you know your children have anxiety over certain things, please be keyed into it. You might want to share that either with other family members, ask your child first, especially if they're older, but give them the license to be able to step out of an activity if they're just not happy. Putting kids on a roller coaster at an amusement park, you know, you might love it. Not everybody does. So like, just try to be mindful. And when you're teaching children that they can back out of a roller coaster ride, it gives them more agency about other things in their lives. That's one thing we know from research, is that the more agency we give children, and autonomy about making certain decisions on their own, that's helpful. It that thinking carries over to much more important areas about child safety, and that they have a right as an individual to speak up.
So there was an interesting time that we were someplace, I forget where it was exactly. I think maybe Eretz Yisrael, but I'm not sure. And there was this family, and it was like 9 in the morning or 8:30, and they were getting their kids into this van, the tender, and you heard all the screaming and yelling, we're late, we're blah, blah. And I'll never forget walking up to the mother and saying, listen, the kids are guaranteed to remember this trip. You get to make a decision. Are they going to remember it for the good or for the bad? You know, we keep forgetting that, like, and in my family, and sometimes it becomes a problem, but the kids, they play. I have teenagers now. They're not getting up to run first thing in the morning to a Chalamaya trip. Okay, so they're not. But you know what? The yelling, screaming is not, you know, it's almost like the line, you know, Rabbi Yakov, we said years ago, you know, I heard you say, do you want to guarantee that your kids will hate religion? Chase them out of bed every morning for Shacharis. You're going to guarantee they'll hate it. Okay. You want to guarantee they'll hate you? You gotta just be, you know, understand that it's a time for family. I mean, you know, to put my my rabbi hat on, right? You know, we talk about the Arba Banim, right? There's 4 different children. Chazal knew that not everyone's the same. There's different kids, different flavors. We have to make sure to do what we can to encompass all of them. So we have to remember that each one has different strokes, different folks. This one might like this one might like that.
I just wanted to add that parents shouldn't make the mistake when it comes to kids struggling with anxiety or shyness. They shouldn't think to themselves like, oh, the roller coaster is the thing that I need to like pressure them to do to break them out of their anxiety. There are plenty of healthy, regular parts of life that are going to be the things where we are going to have to really encourage them. If they're anxious and therefore they're not going to school, we need to get a professional involved. We need to, as parents, figure out how can we get them going regularly to school? How can we get them to be regularly learning? How can we get them to be regularly exercising and being healthy with their minds and with their bodies? And if anxiety is getting in the way of that, we're going to need to utilize all the tools we can to help them embrace that and expose themselves to that and break through their anxieties and grow. But But roller coasters are not the thing that we need to use
And parents should know,
exposure therapy to get our
if you do
children
have a child that's suffering with
break through their anxiety.
So
there are some great tools out there that therapy. When I was a kid, the therapy really wasn't a thing, not much of it. But I remember a child in my school. I knew that one of my students, he had an anxiety issue. And by the way, if you do have a child with an anxiety issue, tell the staff members, tell everybody in their life, so they should know. And I was curious because there was a situation there that he had to do something in public, present something, and he was feeling uncomfortable. I went over to him. I said, "How you doing?" And it was fascinating. He pulled cards out of his pocket, and they were strategies for managing anxiety. One is, this isn't my problem. Two, I have the right to say no. And it actually, I saw him employing, I've seen it with other people since, but if you have a child with anxiety, it's very helpful to give them the tools and be patient and let them go to a therapist and talk it over. I did a talk with Rabbi Jonathan Schwartz, who runs the anxiety clinic. He's fantastic if you're interested. It's called the Anxiety Clinic, Rabbi Jonathan Schwartz. I did a few talks with him during COVID. And he actually said, I said, people are very anxious. He said that he found that some of the kids that struggled with anxiety overall were doing better than kids who didn't, because they had strategies for dealing with anxiety all the time. Yeah, it was fascinating. And I looked around,
coping
and
mechanisms.
I saw how true it was. I was blown away with it. Exactly. Right.
Well, that's the same thing with the studies with social emotional learning versus just standard good touch, bad touch. It's very nice to teach you good and bad, but if we're teaching you the skills,
they had the muscle memory,
and I think that's a perfect opportunity.
So when everybody else
we get calls always before Yom Tov,
freaking out with everything going on. Remember those, like that remember between Purim and Pesach, that first year, how bad it was. That was like really when everything hit. So the kids who had mechanisms for dealing with it were actually, in many cases, not everyone, but many cases, he said that they were actually doing better.
So leading into that, I just want to share, before Yamim Tovim, we always end up with a lot of stories. And I've mentioned this before, Purim, I'll mention it again now. It's important for people to know. There was a very big debate when people call us up and they ask us halachic shailas. What am I allowed to do on a Yom Tov, right? If I'm feeling stressed, can I call a support line? Can I call my therapist? Can I go to a 12-step meeting on Zoom or on this? Or we have people calling up. And again, so at some point, we at Amudim decided, and we're calling it halacha, hashkafa, and heart, the 3 H's, where we have a Rav who is an expert in mental health, who's been involved for many, many years, Rabbi Yisrael Grossberg. And we sort of basically have like a ask the Rav, because a lot of people are embarrassed to call their own Rav. Now, at one point, Rabbi Horowitz will confirm this is true about me. I would have balked at the idea, saying, "Oh, you need to go call a rabbi. If you can do something, go jump in the lake." But we start learning that as we get older and more mature, we realize people, they need to hear it, even if they know it. What was done a few years ago with Reb David Cohen Shlita and Rav Katz putting out that video, and we're going to release it again this year. People make a big mistake. They thought the video was only COVID. We made it very clear. This was the first time in Breakthrough that two poskim, huge halachic authorities, were able to get up there and say something. And I want you to know, afterwards, Reb David Cohen had told me the amount of pressure he got from Talmidim to do a retraction, do a this. People are going to take it out of context. And you know what? Those calls that we got over Yom Tov on the support line spoke volumes for itself. And, there was the old adage, like, when is the girl going to call for help if not Shabbos morning when the father's in shul, But so I do want to say that that's something that we need to address. But I also want to say, but one of the questions we always get often, is, what do I do? My kid hasn't been home in a few years. We don't talk to him. We threw him out. All these different scenarios. He's not from anymore. He is from. He's making believe. I'm less from, more from. Everybody has it. It's going to ruin the other kids, not the other kids. So I'll never forget, last year there was a mother that was very torn, but her and her husband were not on the same page. And we basically guided them and said, listen, you got to call your son and invite him for the Seder. If he drives to you and parks a block away, you love him. If he parks in front, you love him. If he comes, and do me a favor, the Seder is not about peace. The Seder is about inviting him, showing him he can be there. And Matzah, the first days, the mother called me up and said, I want you to know that my son was pretty much, I think she called him a lump on a log, if that's the term. I think that's the term she used, where he didn't do anything, he didn't participate, he just sat there. But at the end of the night, before he was leaving, he turns to me and goes, Ma, I forgot what it's like to be part of something. So this was something that, I hear this and I keep reminding everybody. We talk about being slaves in Egypt, right? We adjust in the Chet Egel. We can go through everything that Pesach has to offer. But what were we? We were broken. We were traumatized. We had no dignity. What's the first thing Hashem did? Did he force us to change? Or he said, I've seen your suffering. That's our model. We've seen your suffering. We want you to know that we're going into Pesach. Pesach is not just a story. When Chazal say, feel like you live it every year, right? I think what they're saying, and I believe this is, every year, all of us can try to find a way that we can either help ourselves or other ones feel seen, feel heard, feel valued. At the end of the day, this is what Klal Yisrael is about. This is what we are about. We are a beautiful nation who loves to be there for each other, but we always have to remember that no matter what it is that we're dealing with, Kuach Nefesh comes first. Pidjay Nefesh comes first. Being able to be there for ourselves and our loved ones, and being, if you're nervous about it, reach out. We'll put you in touch with a Rav. If you want, we're going to put out the videos again. The point is, understand, if you're in pain, please reach out. If you don't feel comfortable with something, try to tell it to your parents before. If you know there's going to be a trigger, if you know something might be difficult, and as a parent or a loved one or an other affected individual, I beg you, understand what Pesach is really about. The real leaving Mitzrayim is that we are seen, we were heard, we were broken. We were not forced to change, to be like everybody else, to wear the clothing they were wearing. Hashem felt our suffering. So that is something that I feel we should all do. And in this chus of everything that we do, we should be zeicha that this should be the final
really
one.
A pleasure
we should
being
be
on with both of you. Thanks
and really
for
have
having me.
a real redemption for all of us.
Amen. Amen. I just want to quickly add, we can put this in somewhere earlier, but to what Zvi just said, and I've heard both Zvi and Rabbi Yaakov, both of you say this, so I just want to say it on behalf of all of us. Validating somebody's emotions does not necessarily mean that you're agreeing with them. So when we want to do what Zvi was just saying in terms of really hearing and seeing our children and the other people around us, we can sit and we can listen and we can paraphrase the difficulties that they're going through. And it does not mean that we necessarily agree and we subscribe to that philosophy or anything like that. But we can say, I'm recognizing the trouble, the difficulty. That's very real. The validation does not necessarily mean agreement. And just one other thing I want to just quickly put in here, especially for this year, is with everything that's going on in Eretz Yisrael right now, the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael going through their Yom Tov are obviously, Mirz Hashem, everything will be over by then and everything will be peaceful. We're holding now about 2 weeks before Pesach, but if not, and there's a lot of chaos and sirens and all that, we ourselves empathize not being there right now. I don't know if either of you are going to be there for Pesach, but we empathize.
Hashem will all be there. Al Kanfei Nisharim.
Amen, amen, with Mashiach, yes. But if not, we just want to make it very clear that we empathize deeply with how chaotic and how disturbing and how not routine and not simple and stressful all of that can be. And it's even harder, but even more important for us, the adults in the families and around the table, to do everything we can to keep as much stability and calmness, to role model the calmness for our children, and not to forget also how many people here in the States and elsewhere in the world, just reading the headlines and hearing about what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, are just living with a level of stress, not to the same level as those actually experiencing it.
And there's also people that might not be making it back home to their parents. We should keep that in mind as well. But just to go back to what you first said, I think the line that I like to use, just to echo that, is validate the feelings, not the story. In other words, people have to learn to separate the two. It's really important. This is what somebody's feeling. I'm here. I'm going to be empathetic. I'm going to be compassionate. We say this in the business world, trust and verify, right? It's the same concept, but let's do it in a more practical way. But Rabbi Horowitz, as always, it's a pleasure, and I want to thank all of you, and a big shout out to our producer Tzipi for putting this together.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Be well,
Tzipi.
guys. Always a pleasure.
And hopefully we'll keep changing the world one person at a time.
Amen. Thank you so much, everybody.
I will stand for you. We can face the world together if we raise our voice and make the choice to learn to live again. I will stand for you when you need me more than ever. We will face the truth and find a new way through. We will stand for you.